So today we're going to be having a look at LMS, Last Man Standing, Killbook of a Bounty Hunter by Dan Levisi. And I'm pretty excited to share this because this is one of my favorite books, period. I want to go through both of these editions of the book, and so I'm not wasting your time, I'll just direct you to where you need to be in the video. So if you have never heard or seen anything about Last Man Standing, or maybe you've seen something or heard something, and you're a bit curious about it, then you can stay right here because we're going to go through the more recent edition, the bigger edition, which is definitely the one you want to go for. But if you already have this book, then I recommend skipping through to when we look at this first edition, because I had never seen anything online of people really comparing the two, and though they are very, very similar, there is quite a lot of stuff that has been changed for the more recent edition, so I thought maybe you might be curious to see some of the art that has been changed, some of the art that wasn't included in the more recent edition, and also a couple of potential spoilers as well that have been sort of deliberately redacted from the most recent edition. And just quickly before we get into this book, I really want to encourage you to go and check out a Kickstarter called The Last Amazon. This is not like sponsored or anything, or I have no connection to anyone involved in that or anything. It's just something that I'm backing and I really want to see succeed. It's a book that they're trying to bring to life that feels kind of very similar to me to this one in a good way. From a visual perspective, it looks really nice. So I really want to see The Last Amazon succeed. So I'll put a link to that in the description, and I really encourage you to go check that out and see if it's something you might be interested in and want to help bring to life. But now let's take a look through Last Man Standing. And like I said, we're going to be going through this second edition, which was printed in 2013. So first of all, format-wise, this is the largest book I own. The page size is just crazy, and I'm sure contributes to this being a rather expensive book. However, as we go through, you're going to see that this is not just some sort of superfluous decision. It really contributes to the enjoyment of the book, because there's just so much detail in the art and visuals that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. So what is this book and why do I like it so much? Well, I can sort of address both questions with one answer, and that is, I'm really not aware of anything else quite like this book. Just to give you a very quick idea of what the story about, it's set 600 years in the future, and it's about this super soldier called Gabriel who is a war hero and then comes back and sort of becomes almost like a superhero in a war against crime, but then is accused of a crime he didn't commit and goes on a quest of revenge. So there is a story, there are characters, but that's not what I love about this book. What I love about this book is the way that it is delivered. This story, the characters, this world is presented in this Killbook, which is kind of like a diary scrapbook written by Gabriel, the main character, and through various different documents that he's compiled in here in this sort of like dossier, and his own notes that are written throughout, we learn about this story, the characters, the world. This is just such a cool way to introduce people to a world you've created. So where a lot of other fictional worlds and franchises often get like a world book, a lore book, a companion book, whatever you want to call it, that's sort of focused on explaining and exploring a fictitious world that already exists from, say, a movie, a video game, a comic book, whereas this is sort of a guidebook that doesn't already have a pre-existing franchise to build off. And it just works so well. It's so cool. I really can't believe that other creators have not used this method either sort of before or since. By the way, if they have, if you're aware of something that's sort of like this, please let me know, because I'd be very interested. But in terms of my knowledge, or at least as well as I can remember, this really stands out to me as being a very unique way of introducing audiences to your world. So the story is okay, I like it fine, it's nothing special. The writing is, you can tell that Dan Levisi is not a writer, but none of that really matters. That's not why I love this book. Why I love this book is the visuals and the way that this vision and idea has been executed. So as you can see, it's sort of done in a scrapbook style, which is definitely my sort of favorite and I think most visually exciting form of page layout. And then, as you can also no doubt see, the art is just mind-blowing. It's done in a hyper-real style and has such an attention to detail that it just really convinces me that Dan Levisi must be one of the best artists of all time. So I mentioned this is set 600 years in the future, and I'm not someone who's a fan of sci-fi really at all. I don't like the aesthetic or the stories that much. But why I really responded to this is it has, let's say it feels a lot more like Saints Row than Halo in a way, which kind of feels weird to use as comparisons because those two games are not really that comparable, but that's just what came to mind. It has a really great urban feel and feels a lot more relatable to our modern world than, say, something, that's more focused on spaceships and things like that, and where a lot of things set in the future are very sort of sparse and Spartan, and people don't really seem to have any real forms of art and entertainment or commercialism and stuff like that. This world really does have that and makes it a lot more sort of relatable, and like I said, feels very sort of contemporary in a way. Like, my favorite thing is just all the sort of different objects and documents and photos and things that are sprinkled throughout the book that sort of inform you about this world. Like, there'll be things like a ticket stub for a movie in the world, magazine covers, books, toys, there's even a packet for a condom, there's CD covers, and it shows you the back with like track listings. There's just posters. There's just so much. It's definitely my favorite part. And like I was saying about the scrapbook style, it all just looks so great and is such an immersive way to get you involved in this world and really get a feel for it and an understanding. It really feels fleshed out, where a lot of other worlds try to overwhelm you with impressive epicness of all these different crazy lands and races and things like that. The world in this book seems much more focused on presenting you with a rich experience rather than a grand one, although that said, it is fairly epic and expansive at certain points. But my point is, it's very much the reward is in the details, and I think that's one of the things I most appreciate about this book. You can tell how much time and care and effort was put into this. I think it took Dan Levisi maybe 2.5 years, and it really shows. I can't imagine just like the patience he must have in crafting something, in spending so much time on something in an industry and indeed a world where things often feel very rushed. So many books have certain elements that are kind of a bit sloppy and you feel like the time wasn't given. This book is just the complete antithesis of that, and it's so gratifying to see someone who really cares about every little thing and just focused on creating really rewarding details, something that feels really immersive and that the time was taken to make it the best it could be. One sort of exception to that is the writing is not necessarily the strongest, but like I said, that's not really the focus here. That's not why I love this book. I don't give a shit how good or bad Dan Levisi is with words compared to how masterful his talent is as an artist, and his vision and the way that he has created this book is really where the focus is. And so the fact that the writing is a little bit raw really doesn't bother me that much, with one major exception that is pretty much the only criticism I have for this book, which is that the editing is absolutely atrocious. Again, I don't really blame Dan Levisi for this because, like I said, he's more sort of like a visual genius, and so I don't really care to expect him to also be a literary one. So I put the blame firmly on the publisher, Dark Horse, and the editors. Remember, this is the second edition, so it's not like a first edition where these errors just weren't caught. This is a second printing from a relatively big publisher, and on the inside, where the credits are of the book, it lists an editor and an assistant editor, which I honestly cannot believe that they even read this book. It is, I'm not talking like a handful of esoteric grammatical mistakes. I'm talking like, unless your first language is not English, these are the sort of things that it's sort of unfathomable how a lot of these grammatical errors weren't picked up, but then also a lot of clunky sentences. Things like, I remember there was one that was something like, the wound that was inflicted left him wounded. And seriously, this happens probably like every couple of pages. There is something that, like, look, I'm not trying to talk trash, or I hate being mean to people or anything. I'm not saying like these editors or whatever should be fired for this, but they and the publisher should be extremely embarrassed by this. And like I said, this is the only criticism, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it is really sort of a bit annoying in an otherwise very, very immersive book to have these sort of jarring errors in the text sort of pull you out of it every couple of pages. And so this section is where the majority of the new pages for this edition come in. It's sort of like a fan art section that has just been done by lots of other really great talented artists based on this world of LMS. And I really like how they've got, like, I'm assuming these are pictures of the actual artists when they were kids, and it says, you know, aged 5, age 7, stuff like that. So it's masquerading as like a school class has sort of done all this art and sent it as sort of fan mail to Gabriel, which is pretty funny. In fact, that's something I didn't really communicate, that this book has a really, really great sense of humor about it as well, which is probably another reason why I said I liken it more to Saints Row than Halo. But now let's talk about the publication history, because it's very, very interesting. So Dan Levisi pitched this book to Heavy Metal, and I guess they gave it the go-ahead, and he worked on it for 2.5 years, and then they released it in 2010, and it really, really took off in a huge way, the sort of way that if you're someone who, you know, creates some sort of intellectual property, you really wish this happened to you. It debuted, I think, at Comic-Con, where it sold out completely, and then there was this sort of bidding war for the movie rights, which came down to, I believe, Warner Brothers and Paramount finally won out. And so it was set to become this huge movie franchise, and not just that, but they were also preparing for this to be like video games and apps and toys and apparel and comics. And actually, I should have probably mentioned this earlier, because I think that originally this book was created to sort of set up a series of graphic novels that would then, you know, explore the world, I believe, through a more traditional sort of like sequential comic. And then the copies from that first printing were all sold out and were selling for crazy prices on the second-hand market. And then the publishing rights were given to Dark Horse to do a second edition, a second printing. And there are actually quite a lot of differences between that printing. It was sort of like the whole book was very much sort of reworked and expanded, and I'll talk a lot about those differences when we go through that first edition. But unfortunately, the movie seemed to get stuck in sort of development hell, and as of now, none of those sort of amazing things have eventuated. And in fact, I could be very wrong, but I think that it really doesn't look like the movie's actually going to happen at this stage. I think that Dan Levisi is currently working on pitching it as an anime series, which, whether a movie or an anime series or whatever, I'm really interested to see the future of this property develop. But at the same time, I mean, honestly, I just wish the focus was being moved to doing like a sequel volume to this book, or even just focusing on a sort of graphic novel series, because the things that made me fall in love with this book are not necessarily things that can be translated to another medium. It's the visuals, it's the scrapbook style, it's the way the world is communicated through a book that is really what made me a fan of this. And so yeah, I'm not sure those are sort of things that can be translated to screen. But whatever the case, I'm very excited to see what the future has in store for this world that's been created, because I really just can't stress how absolutely amazing I find this book to be. And again, if it looks like something you might be interested in, definitely go check out that Kickstarter I mentioned, The Last Amazon. The link, again, will be in the description, because that also looks like something that's going to be using this really great visual way of communicating world building and storytelling through a book.